Oh, there's a comment. Let me actually do this. Because the great thing about BillWhittle.com is the member written commentary. Scott and I talk about this all the time. We're constantly seeing stuff on BillWhittle.com that are written by members. It's for members only. There's one other thing I do want to talk about, separate subject, but this I just caught as one of the comments posts that were most recently put up there. It just happens to be here, so let's just see what this has to say. I love Bill in the Stratosphere Lounge, but I would like to hear more of Bill's lighter side now and again. We're all going to hell in a handbasket. I know this, but I also know that in enough parts of these United States, you can get a bucket of Southern fried chicken and buttermilk biscuits with coleslaw on the side, served with a cold glass of sweetened iced tea with a nice wedge of lemon. I want to hear about it. I don't know. The outdoor concerts he's been to, his favorite jazz blues performances, and so on. I'm really, really glad you wrote that, Edward. I will go to take a look at the Facebook page. You know what's interesting about this, Edward, is well, not to put too fine a point on it, but it is the ending, and I mean when I say the ending, I mean the last sentences, the last three sentences of Part 4 of Apollo 11. They are, I find them to be unbelievably optimistic, unbelievably kind and generous to millennials, and in fact, in admiration of them. But you're right. One of the problems with constantly trying to fight against the things that are going wrong is you spend a lot of time talking about things that are going wrong. And also, what am I trying to say here? I don't know. We're living in a time of some things that are advancing tremendously, and those things I do get excited about, although I tend to over talk about them, like the Star Citizen stuff. Drink time. But a lot of what motivates me is just this kind of either disbelief or frustration or anger or whatever. It's stuff that's just shouldn't be talking about whether or not the Earth is flat in 2019. So as far as the personal stuff goes, this show used to be more about personal stuff, I suppose, and I've never the Apollo series I just finished was the only time I felt comfortable really talking about the personal stuff. When I say comfortable, meaning this was the first time I didn't think it was particularly boring. Only because it tied into the Apollo story, and it gave the Apollo story a personal aspect, and also gave it kind of a through line. I don't talk more about personal things because, to be perfectly honest with you, I just can't imagine what interest they would be. But having just written this thing that I'm so proud of makes me maybe want to reconsider that. I've always been amazed. I'm amazed that people are watching this now. Needless to say, the fact that there are people watching, a few of them watching live, is an indication of just how low that bucket can go when you get into bell curves. Especially when you get on the far, far end out on the left, 7 or 8 sigmas on the low end, you find some interesting people out there. And I am their lord and idol. There are a bunch of things, personally that I could talk about, I guess. The thing I realized about the Apollo thing, and this was something else I wanted to talk about. What I realized doing the Apollo thing is that good storytelling is good storytelling, and a good story can, if you can tell a good story, you can talk about anything. You really can. We have had some basic, very early discussions about doing more of these with the folks over at Daily Wire. I was asked what I would do next if I had the chance. I said I really like this 4-part idea where we basically do a lot of research and a lot of writing, and that gets us a whole 4-part month out of the way. So I said, if it were up to me, what I would do next is I would do the Battle of Leyte Gulf, because as it turns out, it's actually 4 battles. Each one of them would be an hour. Part 1 is interesting. They're all interesting. And if I did it in the same overall general structure as the moon landing thing, I am not a Daily Wire employee, by the way. Since somebody just asked, I'm a paid consultant, a private contractor to them so far. But the thing about doing 4 hours on Leyte would be that there are 4 individual stories, and they're all great individual stories. But you can tie them together so that one depends on the other one in the way that it did in real history. Taffy 3 obviously is, I think, just one of the great untold stories in all of history, let alone American history. But that would be part 3 of a 4-part series. Part 2 would be Battle of Suryago Strait, which was part of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, where if the American ethos if our image of courage and the qualities that we admire show up in Taffy 3, when a destroyer and then a destroyer air escort and then another destroyer go and face the most powerful surface fleet ever in history, the super battleship Yamato simply being the biggest one of an entire fleet of battleships, cruisers, destroyers, all of it. What if an American destroyer turns around and runs right down their throat in order to slow them down, and then a destroyer escort, which is 2/3 the size of it, follows? And if that's the essence of what American heroism is, then the Battle of Suryago Strait is the absolute essence of what the Japanese vision of heroism is. And this I find exceedingly interesting, because Suryago Strait was basically a suicide mission. It was a sacrifice mission, which we don't do. We do dangerous things and we do long shots, but I'm not aware of the United States ever having a suicide mission. I've heard things described as suicide missions when, I don't remember if it was the Johnson or the Roberts, but when the captain said, we're going into this fight, he said, we're about to engage an enemy surface fleet. Survival is not expected. Battle stations. That is what many people would call a suicidal move, but the fact of the matter is, I don't know if most of the people survived on that destroyer. Johnston sank, Hogue sank, I think. Samuel B. Roberts sank. I don't know whether the majority of the crew survived or not, but certainly large numbers of both crews survived. And so it's not a suicide mission. But what the Japanese did in Suryago Strait really was. Because what they were so just for the sake of it, I'm not going to go through the whole Battle of Leyte Gulf, believe me. But if I were to be setting up the next one, it's a 4-part battle. The first part is the Japanese fleet is coming to intercept the American landings on Leyte Island, and they're sending everything they've got. And they've got this powerful, powerful, powerful surface fleet composed of the Yamato and the Musashi, the twin super battleships that took basically all of the Japanese construction ability for 6 or 7 years. So they've got this deadly surface fleet that are going to sink ships with guns, because the Pacific War is all about aircraft and all about submarines, as it's been told. So they're going to launch this surface fleet and try to blow up and sink the transports that are doing the landing and throw the Americans back into the ocean. Now, in order to do this, they have to get the immensely powerful American fleet out of there. We not only have an enormous carrier force there with carrier aviation, we've also got a very strong surface battle fleet as well. And so the Japanese decide that the only way that they can have a chance to pull this off is to do two things. The first thing is going to be a decoy. It's going to be a bait. They're going to send their carriers out to the north. The Japanese carriers, which we have spent the entire war trying to sink. After Saipan, these surviving Japanese carriers are worthless. They're absolutely worthless. They're worthless because they no longer have any pilots. They barely have any airplanes. They do not have pilots who are capable of landing on a carrier anymore. We've just destroyed their naval aviation, utterly destroyed the personnel. They're all dead. So the idea is we're going to send the carriers out north of the Americans, and Halsey, being in command of the carrier fleet, who has already criticized Spruance for not going after the Japanese carriers earlier on a few occasions. We're just going to dangle that carrier bait out there. And knowing Halsey, we're going to bet that when he finds out that the Japanese aircraft carriers, even though they're now essentially worthless, are out there, he's going to go after them with everything he has. And sure enough, that's exactly what he does. And he takes his surface fleet with him. Meanwhile, the Battle of Suriago Strait, they take two obsolete battleships that have been used for training, the Muso and the Yamashiro, and they send them south so that this two battleships, a cruiser, and a couple of destroyers, 5-6 destroyers, come up from the south, and they're going to pull the American surface fleet down to intercept that group. So that's going to be a feint. This is a decoy. This is a feint. And with the American fleet going north after the carriers, and with the American surface fleet coming south to stop this surface action group coming up from the south, then that might leave the landing party, the transports open, and that's exactly what happened. But the second part of the battle is the Japanese battleships sailing into this narrow channel of Surigao Strait, knowing that the route is lined with PT boats and knowing that the entire American surface fleet is out there waiting for them. That's why they're there, to bring them down, hold them in place. It's a form of ritual suicide, and it turned out to be ritual suicide. Unlike the Johnson or the Roberts, which had half the crew or more survive. When the Fuso and the Yamashiro went down, they were like a crew of 1,300 people, 5 survivors, 10 survivors from both ships, by weird coincidence. So anyway, that's a death sentence, and I just find it interesting. I find it interesting that the Musashi and the Yamato, which were the 2 super battleships that were going to win the war. Is anybody aware? Anybody else aware about this? The Yamato and the Musashi, 2 most powerful surface battleships ever built, neither one of them ever sank so much as a lifeboat. They didn't sink anything that I'm aware of. I know for a fact the Musashi didn't. They said the first time her guns were fired in anger was when they were firing their newly developed anti-aircraft shells that they could shoot out of the big guns. So you got this giant, enormous investment of money and time and all this stuff, never, ever once used, and just sank in part 1. Part 2, Surigao Strait. Part 3 is Battle off Samar with Taffy 3. And then part 4 is Halsey catching up to the Japanese carriers and hurting them real bad. I can tell that story. That nobody talks about surface combat. All they talk about is naval aviation and submarines. But the surface combat since Jutland is horrible. Horrible. I think it was Chesty Puller went on board a ship at Guadalcanal after Guadalcanal was more or less secured, and said, "I wouldn't trade places with you for anything. I'm not going to go in one of these metal coffins." I think I might have mentioned back when I was doing nothing but reading about this. These are the kind of things. I lost the online conversation while I talked about this for the 10th time. Yeah, apparently I guess I have. Anyway, I don't know what to say about that. I think what I'm going to do from now on is I'm going to have to. I'm just going to take questions. I really think that's it. I think the answer to this whole thing is just open mic night, and for me to stop doing these opening, you know, rounds, because I come here and I just sit down and mostly talk about stuff that I'm interested in. And you're right, it's getting very repetitive. It's really getting to the point where we've heard, you know, heard most of this stuff so many times before. It's just where my mind goes.